Introduction: the two-page memo. The end came not with a bang, but with a digital whisper. On a quiet day in July 2025, the story that had consumed the world, a saga of unimaginable wealth, depravity, and power that promised a final reckoning for the global elite, was officially declared over. It didn't conclude with a historic trial, a sweeping indictment of powerful men, or a press conference with charts and damning evidence. It ended with the quiet upload of a two-page, unsigned memo, bearing the logos of the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Its message was as sterile as it was brutal. Jeffrey Epstein did not maintain a client list. There would be no more files released. The investigation was finished. For those who had followed the case, the memo was a stunning reversal, a flagrant contradiction of a promise made by the nation's highest law enforcement officer just months earlier. The public had been primed for a revelation. In February 2025, Attorney General Pam Bondi had stood before the cameras and uttered the words that lit a fire across the nation, confirming the existence of the one document everyone craved. Asked about the infamous Epstein client list, she declared, "It's sitting on my desk right now to review. This book is an investigation into how that promise was made, and why it was so spectacularly broken. It seeks to answer one central, overriding question: how and why was a sprawling, decades-long investigation into a man with unparalleled connections to the global elite systematically dismantled and officially concluded with the simple, unbelievable claim that no client list ever existed?" This was not just about a list. It was about a public pact of accountability, a pact that was made and then betrayed, in plain sight. The two-page memo did not just close a case, it attempted to erase the very questions the public was demanding answers to. The journey to that two-page memo was a masterclass in narrative management. It began in February 2025, when the Trump administration, under immense pressure to deliver on its promises to expose the deep state, staged a media event. A hand-picked group of conservative social media influencers were invited to the White House and presented with thick binders dramatically labeled "The Epstein Files, Phase 1, and stamped "Declassified." The initial excitement was palpable. The truth, it seemed, was finally at hand. But the excitement quickly curdled into anger. The influencers and reporters who examined the binders found they contained little more than documents already in the public domain: old flight logs and a heavily redacted address book. The grand reveal was a dud. Facing a backlash and accusations of a cover-up, Attorney General Bondi pivoted. The failure, she claimed, was not hers, but the FBI's. She announced that a truckload of previously withheld evidence had been handed over by the Bureau. She spoke of tens of thousands of videos showing Epstein with children or child porn that her office was now diligently reviewing. A new, more potent narrative was born. The administration was fighting to bring the full truth to light against entrenched bureaucratic resistance. For months, this was the official story. The delay was not a cover-up, but a necessary process to protect victims and prepare the bombshell revelations to come. Then came the reversal, the unsigned, two-page memo. It systematically negated every promise. It stated there was no incriminating client list, no credible evidence, that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals, and, most damningly, no evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. When confronted with the glaring contradiction of Bondi's "list on my desk" claim, the White House offered a weak explanation. The Attorney General had been speaking, in general, about all the case paperwork. This sequence of events was not a series of blunders. It was a calculated strategy. The hyped-up Phase 1 release and the subsequent promises of tens of thousands of videos were designed to control the public conversation, creating the illusion of transparency while delivering nothing of substance. The final, unsigned memo was a narrative kill switch, flipped to terminate the official story abruptly, leaving behind a vacuum of confusion and contradiction. The memo's anonymity was its power. It was an institutional declaration with no individual author to hold accountable. The goal was never a linear release of information. The goal was to manage, and ultimately extinguish, public expectation. How could a story involving hundreds of victims and the world's most powerful men be neutralized by 2 pages of paper? To understand this act of narrative erasure, we must go back to the beginning, to the original sin of the Epstein case, the deal that was engineered to guarantee justice would never be whole. Chapter 1. The Immunity Machine. The first crack in the facade. It started in Palm Beach, Florida, in March of 2005. A 14-year-old girl's parents walked into a police station with a story that defied belief. Their daughter, they alleged, had been lured to a waterfront mansion by an older girl and paid $300 to strip and give a massage to a wealthy financier named Jeffrey Epstein. The local police chief, Michael Ryder, launched an investigation that quickly snowballed. He and his detectives would eventually identify dozens of potential victims, many of them minors, some as young as 14, all telling a hauntingly similar story of recruitment, cash payments, and sexual abuse. Ryder believed he had an airtight case against a monster operating in plain sight. But as he dug deeper, he slammed into an invisible wall. The Palm Beach County State Prosecutor, Barry Krischer, seemed strangely reluctant to act. Despite the mounting evidence gathered by police, including interviews with 5 alleged victims and 17 witnesses under oath, Krischer convened a grand jury but presented evidence from only 2 victims. The grand jury returned just a single, minor charge of felony solicitation of prostitution. Frustrated and convinced that a powerful figure was being protected, Ryder took an extraordinary step. He publicly accused the state prosecutor of being too lenient and called in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI opened its own investigation, codenamed Operation Leap Year, and by June 2007, federal prosecutors had compiled a formidable 53-page indictment that could have put Epstein behind bars for life. The federal government was now involved, and everything was about to change in a way no one could have predicted. Engineering impunity. What happened next was not justice. It was the meticulous engineering of impunity. The 2007-2008 Non-Prosecution Agreement, or NPA, was not a simple, sweetheart deal, but a sophisticated machine designed to manufacture blanket immunity for an entire criminal enterprise. At its center was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, Alexander Acosta. The negotiations were shrouded in secrecy. They included an unusual off-site breakfast meeting at a hotel between Acosta and Epstein's high-powered attorney, Jay Lefkowitz. An email from Lefkowitz to Acosta, later unearthed by the Miami Herald, laid bare the terms of their private understanding. "Thank you for the commitment you made to me during our October 12 meeting," Lefkowitz wrote, adding that he was hopeful Acosta would keep the deal confidential. "You assured me that your office would not contact any of the identified individuals, potential witnesses or potential civil claimants." This promise was a direct violation of the 2004 Crime Victims' Rights Act, a federal law requiring prosecutors to notify victims of such proceedings. The deal was designed to be invisible. Years later, when pressed to explain this extraordinary arrangement, Acosta reportedly offered a chilling justification to President Trump's transition team. According to a former senior White House official, Acosta claimed, "I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence, and to leave it alone." Pause and consider this. You are the top federal prosecutor in South Florida. You have a 53-page federal indictment on your desk, detailing a massive sex trafficking operation involving dozens of confirmed minor victims. Your own investigators are ready to go. Why would you suddenly halt the entire federal investigation, bypass your own indictment, and secretly sign a deal that not only gives the primary target a shockingly lenient sentence but also grants immunity to everyone else involved? Why would you do this based on a cryptic, off-the-record warning that your target belonged to intelligence? The most audacious component of the NPA was a single, legally anomalous clause. The deal didn't just protect Epstein from federal charges. It protected his entire network. Imagine a legal document that functions like a black hole, pulling in and extinguishing any future prosecution. The government's deal didn't just protect Epstein. It named 4 of his alleged recruiters, Sarah Kellen, Adriana Ross, Leslie Groff, and Nadia Marcinkova. And then, with 4 simple words, it extended that shield of immunity to any potential co-conspirators of Epstein. Legal experts, former prosecutors, and even members of Epstein's own defense team would later admit they had never seen a provision so broad, so all-encompassing. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card for an entire criminal network, written before that network had even been fully identified. This was more than a failure of justice. It was a preemptive, structural cover-up. The primary function of the 2008 NPA was not merely to give Epstein a light sentence of 13 months in a county jail with work release privileges. Its true purpose was to legally neutralize the entire network around him, making future investigations in that district impossible. Standard plea deals are designed to pressure lower-level players to flip and testify against the kingpin. The Epstein NPA did the exact opposite. By granting blanket immunity to all potential co-conspirators, it removed any incentive for them to cooperate and effectively decapitated any future investigation into the men who paid for the girls Epstein and his associates provided. The secrecy of the deal was paramount, a clear indication of the desire to avoid public scrutiny and legal challenges from victims who would have certainly objected. Acosta's "belong to intelligence" comment provides the only explanation that matches the unprecedented breadth of the immunity provision. A simple, sweetheart deal for a wealthy man wouldn't necessitate immunizing his entire network. Protecting an intelligence operation, however, would. The NPA was not a botched prosecution. It was a successful protection operation, designed to contain the damage not just to Epstein himself, but to the powerful individuals and potential intelligence interests connected to him. It was the first, and most critical, step in ensuring there would never be a list. The deal was signed, sealed, and illegal. The victims were silenced. But the physical evidence, the flight logs, the calendars, the infamous Black Book, still existed. It was a ticking time bomb scattered across law offices, court vaults, and evidence lockers. The next phase of the cover-up required a disappearing act. Chapter 2. A Disappearing Act. The Book on the Sidewalk. The story of Jeffrey Epstein's Little Black Book is a fitting metaphor for the entire case, a tangible piece of evidence shrouded in a bizarre, almost unbelievable narrative. We are not talking about the book that was famously leaked to Gawker in 2015. This is an earlier version, allegedly from 1997. Its origin story, as told by the auction house that put it up for sale, is like something from a spy novel. A musician in Manhattan reportedly found it lying on a Fifth Avenue sidewalk in the mid-1990s. She kept it in storage for decades, only realizing its significance after Epstein's 2019 arrest. She then sold it on eBay to a PhD student. In 2024, this book surfaced at Alexander Historical Auctions in Maryland, with a starting bid of $35,000. A forensic document examiner was hired to authenticate it. The examiner's report concluded that the book's binding and data suggested it predated the more famous online version and was likely created in the late 1990s. It reportedly contained 349 names, with 221 of them not appearing in the later version. It was described by the auction house as a piece of criminal evidence of the highest order. And yet, despite its explosive potential, its authenticity was never officially confirmed by the FBI, nor was it ever entered into evidence in any criminal proceeding. It simply exists, a ghost of evidence, its full contents and significance left to speculation. Why? A forensic accounting of missing evidence. The story of the Black Book is not an anomaly. It is part of a systematic pattern of crucial evidence being sealed, lost, discredited, or promised but never delivered. Consider the Phantom tapes. After the embarrassing Phase 1 document release in February 2025, Attorney General Pam Bondi, facing intense criticism, went on camera and made a stunning claim. The FBI, she said, was reviewing tens of thousands of videos showing Epstein with children or child porn. The statement was a bombshell, suggesting a trove of irrefutable evidence was on the verge of being released. It immediately shifted the narrative, positioning the administration as fighting to reveal the truth. But the tapes were phantoms. The Associated Press subsequently reported that multiple lawyers and law enforcement officials who had worked on both the Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell criminal cases had never seen or even heard of such a massive collection of recordings. Critically, neither Epstein nor Maxwell were ever charged with possession of child sex abuse material, a charge that would have been far easier for prosecutors to prove than sex trafficking if thousands of incriminating videos actually existed. The narrative reached its surreal conclusion when FBI Director Kash Patel, appointed by the same administration as Bondi, went on a podcast and casually dismissed the idea of such videos. If there was a video of some guy or gal committing felonies on an island and I'm in charge, he asked, don't you think you'd see it? In one sentence, he contradicted his own attorney general and vaporized the tens of thousands of tapes that had been promised to the public. Then there is the redacted reality of the flight logs. The official documents are a study in obfuscation. We can read that former President Bill Clinton's name appears on the logs. We see Donald Trump's name 7 times. We see the names of Prince Andrew, the lawyer Alan Dershowitz, the actor Kevin Spacey, and even the renowned physicist Stephen Hawking. But these are just names on a page, a map without a legend. The witness testimony, the depositions that could explain what happened on those flights to New York, or Paris, or to Epstein's private island known as Little St. James, remain almost entirely under seal. Thousands of pages of court records have been redacted into meaninglessness by judges, citing the need to protect victim privacy or, more vaguely, concerns of national security. Let's pause and take stock of the evidence that has been neutralized. First, the Little Black Book. Two versions are known to exist. One was leaked to the media years ago. The other, older version surfaced at an auction. Neither has ever been officially authenticated or used by the FBI in a court of law. Second, the flight logs. They have been released, but stripped of the crucial context, the corresponding witness testimony, that would give them meaning. Third, the phantom videos. They were publicly promised by the Attorney General, then quietly dismissed by the FBI director. Tens of thousands of recordings that, apparently, never existed. Fourth, the sealed court records. Thousands upon thousands of pages from civil and criminal cases, including the full grand jury testimony from the original 2006 Florida investigation, remain sealed or so heavily redacted that they prevent a full public accounting of the facts. The handling of this evidence reveals a clear strategy. The promise of releasing evidence, the files, the videos, the list, became more important than the evidence itself. It allowed authorities to project an image of transparency while withholding all meaningful information. The public's focus was skillfully shifted from what the evidence says to when the evidence will be released, an indefinite timeline that perpetually defers accountability. This strategy effectively neutralizes the evidence. By controlling the timing and framing of its release, authorities can exhaust public interest and media attention. The story becomes about the bureaucratic process of disclosure, not the damning content of the disclosures. This benefits anyone whose name might be in the unreleased, unredacted material. The paper trail was being buried under a mountain of redactions and broken promises. Meanwhile, the human trail, the chain of conspirators, was being carefully managed. The conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell was presented to the world as the final, triumphant act of justice. But a closer look reveals it raised the most damning question of all. Chapter 3. The Loneliest Conspiracy. A Verdict of Contradiction. On December 29, 2021, in a New York courtroom, the jury foreperson read the verdict. Guilty, 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 guilty. Ghislaine Maxwell, the sophisticated British socialite and daughter of a disgraced media tycoon, was convicted on 5 of 6 counts, including the most serious charge, sex trafficking conspiracy. Prosecutors had successfully painted her as the enabler-in-chief, a pivotal figure who conspired with Jeffrey Epstein to create a pyramid scheme of abuse by luring and grooming vulnerable teenage girls. Justice, it seemed, had finally been served. But within the legal language of that verdict lay a staggering, foundational contradiction. How can you be convicted of a sprawling, years-long conspiracy, yet be the only conspirator, aside from the dead mastermind, ever brought to trial? Imagine this. Law enforcement busts a massive international drug ring. They arrest and convict the top lieutenant who managed the network of street-level dealers. The U.S. attorney holds a press conference, declaring a major victory in the war on drugs. But they never identify, charge, or even question the powerful kingpins who supplied the narcotics, the financiers who laundered the money, or the corrupt officials who provided protection. That is precisely what happened in the case of Ghislaine Maxwell. She was convicted for her role in a conspiracy, and then the Department of Justice declared the investigation over. The path not taken. This outcome was not for a lack of legal authority. In fact, the government's own legal strategy in the Maxwell trial cleared the path for further prosecutions. Maxwell's defense team had argued that the 2008 Florida non-prosecution agreement, which granted sweeping immunity to Epstein's potential co-conspirators, should protect her from charges in New York. The government, specifically the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, argued the exact opposite, and they won. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed the decision, ruling that the Florida NPA did not bind federal prosecutors in New York. This is a critical point that cannot be overstated. The Department of Justice itself dismantled the primary legal shield that could have protected other members of Epstein's network. The very argument they used to secure Maxwell's conviction confirmed that they were legally free to pursue charges against anyone else who participated in the trafficking operation. The fact that they didn't was not because they couldn't, but because they chose not to. While the legal avenues remained open, the public discourse was deliberately clouded. Starved for a list of names, the media and the public latched onto a completely separate and frivolous civil lawsuit filed in 2020. This bizarre, handwritten suit named a host of celebrities, including Beyoncé and Jay-Z, as defendants. The Associated Press and other fact-checkers were forced to issue reports clarifying that this lawsuit was quickly dismissed by a judge as having no legal or factual basis and was entirely unrelated to Maxwell's criminal trial. This conflation, whether accidental or intentional, served to muddy the waters. It made any legitimate discussion of actual, unnamed co-conspirators seem like the stuff of wild fantasy, lumping serious questions in with frivolous lawsuits. Maxwell as the firebreak. Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction was not the culmination of justice. It was a strategic firebreak, an operation designed to contain a raging wildfire by sacrificing one section of the forest to save the rest. After Epstein's death, the public pressure for accountability was immense. A high-profile trial was a political necessity. Maxwell was the perfect target. She was intimately involved in the recruitment and grooming of victims, as survivor testimony powerfully illustrated. As a foreign national, she was a less politically sensitive target than a prominent American. And the narrative of the wealthy, predatory madam was a compelling one for a jury and the public. The prosecution focused its case narrowly on Maxwell's role as Epstein's direct accomplice, using the courageous testimony of a small number of victims to prove a conspiracy between the two of them. They successfully convicted her and secured a 20-year prison sentence, a significant punishment that sent a powerful message: justice has been done. And with that victory in hand, the official narrative shifted on a dime. The two-page memo was released, declaring that no further investigations into third parties would be pursued. The conviction was the necessary prerequisite for closing the case. It provided the political and public cover needed to shut down all other avenues of inquiry. Without convicting Maxwell, the calls to investigate the clients, the powerful men who created the demand for trafficked girls, would have been deafening. With her conviction, the system could claim its trophy and declare the hunt was over. She was the sacrifice made to protect the network. The legal system had drawn its line in the sand. Maxwell was the end of the road. But another, even more powerful system had been working in the background all along, providing the fuel that made the entire trafficking machine run. To understand the true scale of the cover-up, we have to follow the money. Chapter 4. The Billion-Dollar Black Hole. The Financial Engine. We are inside the polished, marble-lined world of J.P. Morgan Chase, the largest bank in the United States. The year is 2008. Jeffrey Epstein has just pleaded guilty to soliciting a minor for prostitution in Florida and is now a registered sex offender. For any financial institution, this should have been a blaring, 5-alarm fire. Yet for the next 5 years, until August 2013, J.P. Morgan Chase would continue to serve as Epstein's primary banker. They provided him with loans and, crucially, allowed him to withdraw large sums of cash, often hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. Lawsuits filed years later by his victims would allege that this river of cash was the lifeblood of his trafficking operation, used to pay the girls he abused and the recruiters who brought them to him. What did the bank know? And why did it continue to look the other way? The answer, it turns out, is that they knew plenty. The subsequent legal fallout revealed that major global banks were not merely complicit bystanders, they were the indispensable financial engine of Epstein's crimes. The price of that complicity was steep, but it was paid in dollars, not in full disclosure. This wasn't a parking ticket. This was the cost of doing business with a monster. J.P. Morgan Chase agreed to pay a staggering $290 million to settle a class action lawsuit brought by Epstein's victims. Deutsche Bank, which eagerly took Epstein on as a high-value client in 2013 after J.P. Morgan finally cut ties with him, paid $75 million to settle claims that the bank knowingly benefited from his trafficking ring. In its own lawsuit against J.P. Morgan, the government of the U.S. Virgin Islands was brutally blunt, stating in court filings that human trafficking was the principal business of the accounts Epstein maintained at J.P. Morgan. The stonewalled Senate and the silent Treasury. The story of the bank's involvement goes beyond mere negligence. It leads directly to the halls of Congress and a stunning act of stonewalling by the executive branch. From 2022 to 2025, the Senate Finance Committee, under the leadership of Senator Ron Wyden, conducted an investigation into the financial ties between Epstein and the billionaire financier Leon Black, then the CEO of Apollo Global Management. The committee uncovered that Black had paid Epstein over $170 million, ostensibly for tax and estate planning advice. The investigation unearthed an explosive document, a copy of the settlement agreement Black had signed with the Attorney General of the U.S. Virgin Islands. In that agreement, Black himself acknowledged that Jeffrey Epstein used the money Black paid him to partially fund his operations in the Virgin Islands. Here was a direct link, an admission that massive payments from one of Wall Street's most powerful figures were used to finance a criminal enterprise. Armed with this, Senator Wyden did what congressional investigators do. He sought the underlying financial records from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. He wanted to follow the money. But the Treasury Department, despite acknowledging that it possessed the requested records, refused to provide them to the Senate Finance Committee. A federal investigation by a co-equal branch of government was stopped dead in its tracks. Imagine you are a top executive at a global bank. Your compliance team flags a new client as high risk. He's a convicted sex offender. His transactions involve large, regular cash withdrawals and suspicious payments to women with Eastern European surnames. But he's also a billionaire who, according to internal bank emails, could generate millions of dollars in revenue and provide introductions to other lucrative clients. What do? The court documents and settlement agreements show that for years, both J.P. Morgan and Deutsche Bank made their choice. They chose profit, the ultimate protection. The Epstein saga reveals a chilling truth about power in the 21st century. It demonstrates that the world's largest financial institutions, and the government agencies that regulate them, function as a parallel system of power. This system has its own form of secrecy that is arguably more effective and impenetrable than any court-ordered seal. While the public and the media were fixated on flight logs and black books, the true list, the ledger of who paid Epstein, who he paid, and how the entire criminal enterprise was financed, was hidden in plain sight on transaction records and suspicious activity reports. These were reports that were either ignored by the banks or, as the Senate investigation revealed, actively withheld from congressional oversight by the Treasury Department itself. The failure to trace and publicize the money trail is the single greatest investigative failure in the entire Epstein affair. It was not an oversight, it was a deliberate choice. A complex international trafficking operation requires a massive, continuous flow of cash for payments, travel, and the maintenance of lavish properties. The big banks provided the operational capability for Epstein's crimes, and the opaque, protected nature of the global financial system provided the ultimate layer of secrecy. This financial black hole ensures that the network's financiers, enablers, and ultimate beneficiaries remain forever anonymous. The banks provided the fuel. The legal system provided the cover. But who provided the top-level protection that made U.S. attorneys back off and Treasury Departments stonewall Congress? We now arrive at the final, most explosive question, the one that leads directly back to that two-page memo and the specter of intelligence. Conclusion: no justice. We return to where we began, the cold, unsigned, two-page memo from the Department of Justice and the FBI. After the journey we have taken, its sterile, bureaucratic phrases sound different. They are not statements of fact, but declarations of power. This systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. There was also no credible evidence found that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals. We did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. No further disclosure would be appropriate or warranted. The official narrative was deliberately and systematically shifted from a sprawling elite conspiracy to the simple story of an isolated predator and his lone accomplice, culminating in a convenient suicide and a tidy, case-closing conviction. This narrative shift was essential to protect the powerful, interconnected network that enabled, participated in, and benefited from Jeffrey Epstein's operation for decades. The "no client list" memo was the final, official act of this containment strategy. So, who benefited most from this outcome? The answer is a vast ecosystem of power. It benefits every powerful person who flew on Epstein's jet, appeared in his black book, or was named in the thousands of pages of sealed witness testimony. It benefits the financial institutions like J.P. Morgan Chase and Deutsche Bank, who paid massive settlements but avoided a full public airing of their internal records that would show exactly who was funding the operation. And, most provocatively, it benefits any state actor or intelligence agency that may have used Epstein as an asset. This possibility was first raised not by a conspiracy theorist on the internet, but by a sitting U.S. attorney, Alexander Acosta, as his rationale for granting the original, unprecedented immunity deal. Numerous reports and books, including one by a self-professed former Israeli intelligence officer named Ari Ben-Menash, have alleged that Epstein and Maxwell were running a honey trap operation, using underage girls to blackmail powerful figures for the benefit of Israeli intelligence. While these claims remain unproven in a court of law, they provide a chillingly logical framework for understanding why a man like Epstein received such extraordinary and sustained protection at every level of the system. Ultimately, the survivors are the ones who are silenced. They are silenced not just with threats and legal intimidation, but by the very system that purports to protect them. When the justice system violates their rights by cutting secret deals with their abusers, as a federal judge ruled it did. When it redacts their sworn testimony into oblivion under the guise of privacy or national security. When it convicts one accomplice but refuses to pursue the vast network she conspired with. And when it declares the case officially closed despite mountains of unanswered questions and missing evidence. All of this sends a clear and chilling message. Your testimony is a threat to the stability of the powerful, and the system will protect the powerful, not you. The tragic death by suicide of Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most prominent and courageous accusers, serves as a heartbreaking testament to the immense and unending toll this fight takes on those who dare to speak out. The government has told its story. They say there was no list. They say the case is over. But the evidence tells a different story. A story of secret deals granting blanket immunity. A story of disappearing records and phantom videos. A story of a conspiracy conviction with only one conspirator ever held to account. A story of global banks that funded a trafficking ring and were allowed to buy their way out of a full accounting. The question is no longer what is in the files. The question is, who is powerful enough to ensure we never get to see them? The official story is that there is no list. The truth is, without that list, there is no justice.